I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for February the 16th, 2026. All right, now before we get started on our theology roundup and later news roundup, I do have a few housekeeping things for you to be aware of. Some of you all know that earlier this morning, there was a major outage on X, formerly Twitter. So that might be delaying some things a little bit. Our live stream goes out to both YouTube as well as X. Likewise, as we get the new week started, if you will, please do turn with me to the Messianic Apologetics website. We try to mention this every Monday. Here in the right-hand column, you see blog notifications. Be automatically notified by email when Messianic Apologetics is updated. So you can click there and put your email address in, hit subscribe, and you'll be asked to confirm. So whenever we post something new or we repost something from our archives, you should be notified. That is different from our email announcement list, which you can subscribe to by clicking on the envelope icon in the upper right-hand corner. And that's associated with Constant Contact. Now, some of you all may be aware of this, you may not be aware of this, but here on the main page, you hit podcast. We do have an audio podcast for Messianic Insider, McKee Moments, everything else. You can listen to it right off the website. Here you see a little player, and this has the last 50 episodes or posts or so. Now, it's presently blocked because the Messianic Insider live icon, but there's some icons up in the right-hand corner. You can click on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Messianic Apologetics is available as an audio podcast. And I highly recommend you take advantage of that, because we do know that a lot of the people who follow us, they do not watch or listen to us live. They instead get caught up, later in the afternoon or in the morning, usually on some kind of drive time. Okay, let's get into our theology roundup. Last week, we started a multi-part series addressing one law or one Torah theology. And this is a subject which garners a great deal of emotionalism. To be perfectly candid with you, on the one law or one Torah side, there have been too many sound bites out there and not enough specific examination of Pentateuchal passages, Torah passages, which use the terms one law or one statute in context. And many people conclude that if you are negatively disposed to one law theology, all of a sudden you are automatically telling non-Jewish believers to leave the Messianic community, stop doing Shabbat, stop doing the festivals or appointed times. We're trying to understand what the terminology one law or one statute meant in ancient context. Was it speaking of universal Torah, or was it speaking of uniform specific instruction? And do we want to focus an entire spiritual or theological movement around that concept? To which I would say, no, we do not. This is a study which is cumulative. There are many parts to it. We're not even halfway finished through all the passages which use one law or one statute. And then later we have to tally some of this all together and come to a theological or philosophical conclusion. But there's a lot of simplistic thinking in the one law or one Torah sub-movement. I haven't been a part of, interacting with people like that for quite some time, over 12, 13 years. I do have some back channel communications from time to time, but my relationship has been, very strained over the years because of a lot of the legalism and the judgmentalism that they have. But we'll get into that further on. Now, this past weekend at my local congregation, I had a discussion with someone who is following this series and was very appreciative. Finally, somebody is getting up and addressing the specific passages because, well, don't you think there's one law for all of us? And, God has one law. It's like, wrong argument. That's the wrong argument. The argument is, what does the terminology mean in these various passages? And what we are going to find out as we go through this study, when it's all said and done, native and sojourner in ancient Israel did have various differences, but they had far more in common than not. And what that means is that as the body of Messiah today, we must focus on those common elements of faith first before we discuss our differences. And indeed, that is not something which today's Messianic community often handles very well. But to be perfectly honest, those in the one law or one Torah camp don't handle it very well either, focusing on common elements of faith first. And so, yeah, I've got people who don't like me in one law, one Torah sectors, some Messianic Jewish sectors as well. And what can I say? I've always, and I said this when we started this study, if you can understand various third, fourth, and fifth alternatives to different Bible passages, you're going to be able to do just fine with this study. If you can't think that way and you think it's either this way or that way, we only have two options, you might not do too well. All right, so today in our study, turn with me to the Messianic Apologetics website. Here you can download our complete article, Approaching One Law Controversies, Sorting Through the Legalism. And as the title implies, I'm going to be getting into some of the friction I've had with one law people over the years later on. But you can click there and the PDF file will open up. And we left off on Friday at Numbers 9:14. And I'm going to stress this, even though it's quite common to hear, well, there's one law for the native and the sojourner. Is that speaking of the Torah as a whole, or is it speaking of specific legislation? Okay, a lot of people can't process that. Even some people who purport to be various deep thinkers, they can't process that. And if you disagree with one law for the native and sojourner, speaking of universal Torah, many incorrectly conclude, and we're going to get into this later on, that you're against non-Jews doing things of Torah, which is not true. Later on, as we will see in our study, especially from Deuteronomy, the wide community of ancient Israel was to be educated in the principles of Moses' teaching, okay? So we're not telling people to stop doing what they're doing, but we do have to think a little more deeply and be a little more specific. And, some people can't handle that, I'm sorry to say. Okay. Numbers 9:14. If an alien sojourns among you and observes the Passover to the Lord, according to the statute of the Passover and according to its ordinance, so he shall do. You shall have one statute both for the alien and for the native of the land. New American Standard. Okay. So here we see you shall have one statute, both for the alien and for the native of the land. That's obviously a specific instruction. Numbers 9:14 appears in a wider context where a series of instructions regarding the Passover is given. Numbers 9:1 through 14, as ancient Israel entered into its second year in the wilderness, and the people observed the Passover. Numbers 9:1 and 2. It was specifically directed You shall observe it at its appointed time. You shall observe it according to all its statutes and according to all its ordinances. In the wilderness of Sinai, according to all that the Lord had commanded Moses, so the sons of Israel did. Numbers 9:3-5, New American Standard. The main focus of the Numbers 9:1-14 instruction was to clarify what to do if one was unclean or tame as a result of being in contact with a dead body. Numbers 9:6. As all natives within the community of Israel were surely expected to remember the Passover. It was inquired of Moses, though we are unclean because of the dead person, why are we restrained from presenting the offering of the Lord at its appointed time among the sons of Israel? Numbers 9:7, New American Standard. Moses went before the Lord because there was no purposeful omission of keeping the Passover. Moses received a response regarding what needed to be done if there was someone unclean because of contact with a corpse, or if there was one who failed to keep the Passover out of willful omission. Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, if any one of you or of your generations becomes unclean because of a dead person, or is on a distant journey, he may, however, observe the Passover to the Lord. In the second month, on the 14th day at twilight, they shall observe it. They shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They shall leave none of it until morning, nor break a bone of it. According to all the statute of the Passover, they shall observe it. But the man who is clean and is not on a journey, and yet neglects to observe the Passover, that person shall then be cut off from his people, for he did not present the offering of the Lord at its appointed time. That man will bear his sin. Numbers 9:10-13, New American Standard. Far be it from those contaminated by a corpse being prohibited from keeping the Passover entirely. They were to remember the Passover 1 month after the standard Passover for the rest of the community. It was also explained how one who was clean or tahor and was not away on a long journey would be cut off and suffer at least some kind of social and or spiritual exism. Such a willful omission of Passover without any special circumstances to consider was considered sin. Okay, now we're going to get into some source criticism here. Those who believe that the Torah was a product of the JEDP sources redacted together after the Babylonian exile, not a product of Mosaic oversight. Is it at all important that nothing was specified in regard to males being circumcised to eat of the Passover lamb, as was stated previously in Exodus 12:48? Those of the critical tradition might claim that the Exodus instruction originated from either the J and or E sources of the Pentateuch, and the Leviticus instruction from the P source, whereas conservatives who hold to a Mosaic origin would not claim that there is any difference of sources here. What is asserted in Numbers 9:3 is kakol kukotav u kukol mishpatav ta'asu oto. According to all its statutes and all its regulations, you shall keep it. New Revised Standard. This would be a reference back to the previous Exodus 12 instructions delivered as ancient Israel left Egypt, which should certainly be in the mind of the Torah reader. Just so that there is no confusion about the allowance for a second Passover to be observed a month later for those who were contaminated by a corpse, the Lord directed that if an alien sojourns among you and observes the Passover to the Lord, according to the statute of the Passover and according to its ordinance, so he shall do. You shall have one statute both for the alien and for the native of the land. Numbers 9:14, New American Standard. Now, how many of you, maybe you've done it yourself, hopefully not, how many of you have seen a passage like Numbers 9:14, you shall have one statute, both for the alien and for the native of the land. You've seen it posted on a meme, and it's been pushed that this is speaking of universal Torah, whereas contextually, it has to do with Passover. It has to do with some specific instruction. And indeed, and just like as we've seen with some of these other passages we've gone through, in many years of interacting with people who identify as holding to one law or one Torah theology, they've just quoted this passage, and frequently there's been no consideration of its ancient context. So that's what we're trying to do here. Let us not overlook how, while the opening two conjunctions, the key, so this opens up the passage here, can be rendered as and if, Revised Standard Version, New American Standard 77, also English Standard Version. They can also be rendered as and when, New Jewish Publication Society Version, as though it was inevitable that the ger or sojourner would keep the Passover, even though it was not upon his immediate entry into the community of Israel. The ki yagur itechem ger. So some of you all will see, well, if an alien sojourns, and it's like, well, is the sojourner possibly going to keep the Passover? Anyone who studies Hebrew knows that the conjunction ki, yes, it can be rendered as if, but it can also be rendered as when. And in fact, the New Jewish Publication Society version has and when. So just keep that in mind. As has been previously witnessed, Exodus 12, 48 and 49, there were not to be multiple sets of requirements detailing how either the Ezrach or native or ger or sojourner eat of the Passover, as both were to be circumcised. Numbers 9:14 did not employ the term Torah, but instead use chukah achat, one statute, Revised Standard Version, New American Standard, English Standard Version, the same statute, Holman Christian Standard Bible, the same regulations, New International Version, the same law, Complete Jewish Bible, or one law, New Jewish Publication Society Version. Chukah means something prescribed, enactment, statute, Brown Driver Briggs. In this instant, chukah achat draws the reader's attention to how the native and sojourner alike in ancient Israel would be keep observing the Passover. Kechukat ha-pesach uke mishpato, in accordance with its rules and regulations, New International Version, or in accordance with the rules and rites of the Passover sacrifice, New Jewish Publication Society Version. Okay. Now, Thomas B. Dozeman's remarks might need to be considered here as he draws attention to the fact that within the Torah's narrative, where this instruction appears, quote, there could be no resident aliens in the wilderness, since all Israel would fall under this category. The emphasis on the resident alien signifies that membership in the congregation is open to outsiders, unquote. Okay. Now, Numbers 9, 13, and 14 is more of an expectation, similar to Exodus 12, 48, and 49, of what was to govern Israel's Passover observance once Israel was firmly planted within the Promised Land. When Moses told ancient Israel that chukah achat was to be followed by both the native and sojourner regarding the Passover, while previous instruction should be remembered, the Numbers 9, 10 through 13 regulations about an unclean person or a willful omission of the Passover were more in view. The ger or sojourner within the community of Israel did not have to wait 2 or 3 months if contaminated by a corpse to keep the Passover, nor would he experience something more or less serious than a cutting off if Passover is ignored. The instruction was the same across the board. R.K. Harrison further states, quote, the provision for the resident alien Ger, summarizes the legislation in Exodus 12:43-49. In Numbers 9:14, however, the resident alien is the only kind of non-Israelite mentioned, the omitted groups being the foreigner, ben nekar, the temporary resident, toshav, and the hired laborer, sakir. The Ger and the native Israelite were to be treated equally, since the Israelites were once in the same condition themselves. Deuteronomy 23:8, unquote. If there is any substantial difference to be observed between Exodus 12:43-49 and Numbers 9:14, it was not that the keeping of Passover was open to the Ger or sojourner as well as the native Israelite. The key difference to be aware of is that Numbers 9:13 assigned that the willful omission of Passover, with this hukah echat applying to both native and sojourner, merited a cutting off. What this all meant for the community of ancient Israel was obvious. If one did not want to be cut off and severely penalized. Dennis T. Olson explains, quote, "The Passover is so significant that even foreigners who live among the Israelites should celebrate it," unquote. Nilly S. Fox is even more direct in actually asserting, quote, "Observance of the Passover is mandatory both for Israelites and resident aliens," unquote, which would seemingly indicate that many of the Gerim or sojourners within ancient Israel might not have been such sojourners for too long upon entering into the community. Although there is debate over what karat can specifically mean, the Passover, as Israel's feast of freedom and deliverance, was something to be taken very seriously, and the Ger or sojourner within Israel was widely expected to recognize it along with the Ezrach or native. Okay, so here we see that, yes, when it came to what do you do about the second Passover? What do you do about not only the native but the sojourner? The native had to wait a month in order to observe the Passover if, contaminated by a corpse away on a journey. And the sojourner in ancient Israel, when observing the Passover, would have done the same. Not you have to wait 2 months or 3 months. No. But it's speaking of that uniform instruction regarding observance of the Passover. And if the actual time for Passover, because there's an extenuating circumstances, if it were not possible, it's the same specific instruction. Okay, let's move on. And what do we do about this today as Messianic people? Today's broad Messianic movement is widely encouraging of Jewish and non-Jewish believers remembering the memorial of the Passover Seder. In fact, congregational Seder events tend to draw in large numbers of evangelical Christian people looking for enrichment from their Jewish roots. However, rather than emphasize the importance of the Passover from a pre-resurrection era standpoint of Numbers 9:14, specifying that those who do not keep it be cut off, Messianic people tend to more readily emphasize the importance of the Passover from Paul's instruction of, let us celebrate the feast. 1 Corinthians 5:8, New American Standard, and most especially Yeshua the Messiah's own words of, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. Luke 22:15, New American Standard. Messianic people today widely emphasize the importance of Passover from a post-resurrection era standpoint of how the sacrifice of the Passover lamb during the ancient Israelites' exodus from Egypt typifies the ultimate sacrifice of Yeshua the Messiah at Golgotha, Calvary, which surely provides permanent restitution for the cutting off of Numbers 9:14. While there are many proponents of a one law, one Torah theology who are seen as supporting a Messiah-centric Passover remembrance, how many of them may be witnessed overemphasizing that those who do not keep the Passover will be cut off via some sort of serious physical consequences instead of how those who dismiss the Passover, particularly evangelical Protestants, are dismissing great blessings and spiritual enlightenment. And indeed, um, you know, we do live in a post-resurrection era with post-resurrection realities. The inauguration of the new covenant, understanding instruction like the Passover in light of Yeshua's Last Supper, his completed work on the tree of sacrifice, and his resurrection from the dead. And yeah, you're going to find that, and this is the real difficult part of the whole one law, one Torah debate, that in the Messianic community, there are different spiritual dynamics which we focus on, which people in one law, one Torah largely do not. And, we can go so far that we can only go so far in recognizing, some of these, very difficult, spiritual dynamics, because as I said, the study is cumulative. I'm going to be getting into some of my difficult experiences I've had with one law proponents over the years. I know that I'm not alone in some of them. And indeed, this is one of the ongoing difficulties of, Messianic apologetics. All right, so let's move on to our news roundup. We go through the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news is, of course, time sensitive and it changes from day to day. Excuse me. There are a lot of things, of course, which I know many people are concerned about right now. Number one, praying for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East. Number two, be praying for Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, and the Iranian situation. Number two, Russia and Ukraine. And of course, number three, be praying for reason and sanity here on the American home front and the Western Hemisphere. One of the big things, of course, which happened over the weekend, we had the Munich Security Conference, which brought in different world leaders, but most especially in Munich, there was a huge rally attended by the exiled Crown Prince of Iran in favor of the end of the Islamic Republic. And a lot of people made observations on that huge rally, estimated that perhaps as many as 500,000 people were at that. We'll get into that in a moment. I'm sorry, 200,000. I'm sorry. But that's a huge number. That it was, relatively peaceful rally. It was in Germany, so the the Federal Republic of Germany was honored. There were German flags, U.S. flags, the rising sun flag of Iran, the Israeli flag. It was, of course, very dynamic, but it was relatively peaceful. It wasn't violent. So, and there were other similar rallies held across the world. There was even one I saw a news report last night. There was even one held here in Dallas locally on Saturday. So, the tension is building right now with, apparent negotiations between the United States and Iran over their nuclear aspirations. But many of us are expecting some kind of military activity in the not too distant future. And it should not escape our notice that we are only just a few weeks away from Purim, or the Festival of Lots. I'm not saying anything's going to happen in conjunction with Purim, but it is something we have to take note of. And I'm sure some people might be speculating about what kind of a Purim we're going to have this year. All right, so all the news stories I'm about to go through, these will be available for you to look at later today when this episode is archived at messianicapologetics.net. All right, our first story, and this is from 2CTV, posted on the 13th of February after we had our stream on Friday. 30-second clip breaking: Trump supports regime change. President Trump says regime change in Iran would be the best thing and that the U.S. military power is on its way. And it is true. One of the things which, and you probably have already seen some of this by now, the Abraham Lincoln Task Group is in the region. The Gerald R. Ford Task Group is on its way. The like a third or more of U.S. naval forces are in the region or approaching the region right now, and the president he's got maximum flexibility. Iran, do you want to cut a diplomatic deal, or are you paying attention to our military force buildup? So yeah, this has got a lot of people, of course, concerned about what could happen, what could not happen, but we need to be praying that the Lord's will be done. And indeed, one of the best things for the people of Iran would be to see the Islamic Republic come to a conclusion. All right, here's an article from the Times of Israel posted 14th of February. So this was from Saturday. Inflammatory tweets by New York City political staffers point to growing normalization of anti-Zionism. New report exposing Mamdani's campaigners' posts supporting Hamas and propagating anti-Israel conspiracies is only the latest controversy surrounding political operatives in the city. And yes, you can read this article in its entirety, and you can come to your own conclusions. But this is not a huge surprise. Many of us were anticipating that with the election of Zohran Mamdani as the mayor of New York, which has the largest Jewish population outside of Israel, that there was going to be a rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, especially with that. And what does this do to the people of New York? What does it do to the people of the Northeast? I mean, the Northeast certainly has one of the largest Messianic Jewish communities in North America. Yeah, everyone's got to sort through this on their own. And we need to take it for what it is, as a road sign. All right, from Visegrad 24. This is from the 14th of February, and there's a 31-second clip posted on 8:08 a.m. Tens of thousands of Iranians gathered in Munich, marking the largest gathering of the Iranian diaspora in history, following a call to action by Iran's crown prince and national leader, Reza Pahlavi. So, yeah, huge gathering in Munich. And here's another article posted on Saturday. 200,000 protesters hit Munich streets to protest Iran's Islamic Republic during gathering of world leaders. So this took place simultaneously with the Munich Security Conference, and as many as 200,000 protesters took to the streets of Munich on Saturday to denounce Iran's Islamic Republic, police said, and the largest ever protest in Europe by opponents of the regime. And of course, it's got the lion and sun flag, which is the old flag of the Kingdom of Iran, Kingdom of Persia. So this is huge. This is huge. And the pressure is building. This weekend, there are a lot of things which go on behind the scenes. There are a lot of things I just feel in the spirit. And I could feel tension in the spirit. I can feel tension in the spirit right now. I know I'm not alone. Is it because of the building situation in Iran? Is it because of some of the things we're addressing theologically? And I'm discovering that a lot of people don't think or reason through matters the way I do. Probably all of the above. And then, yeah, there are other things which go on, which things have to get fixed. Okay. From Open Source Intel, the 14th of February. This was posted at 11:02 a.m. The U.S. and Iran are expected to hold a second round of nuclear talks in Geneva next Tuesday. And indeed, we already know that the foreign minister of Iran has been there. He's talking to the atomic energy representative. I saw that. And yeah, I do expect there to be some talks. We may even be able to discuss some of it tomorrow between U.S. and Iranian officials. Is it going to go anywhere? That's the real question we have to keep in mind. All right, here's an important speech you all need to be aware of from the Munich Security Conference offered by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The New York Post reports Marco Rubio calls U.S. child of Europe and push to dismiss end of the transatlantic era claims. So, of course, ever since Donald Trump returned to the White House last year, and you see him, pushing an America First agenda, and even from the first Trump term, NATO has got to pull its own weight. The United States is paying for well over 50% of NATO's budget. There has been this concern that America First means the United States isn't interested in what goes on in Europe. But here, Secretary of State Rubio calling the United States a child of Europe. We do have a bond with Europe, wanting to assuage some of those fears. U.S.-European relations have altered over the past year. There's no doubting that. Have they been irrevocably altered? We are not at that point now, but this will not be the last time we hear either Secretary of State Rubio or we hear, the president, the vice president, others in the administration say something about U.S.-European relations. All right. From Newsmax, the 14th of February, here's the headline: Trump, Netanyahu agreed U.S. should press Iran to cut oil sales to China. Now, I just want you all to keep in mind that from the perspective of Israel, Israel's concern is Iranian nuclear aspirations, their ballistic missile program, their support of, terror proxies. And yes, those are things that the United States is concerned with as well. But the United States is concerned with a country like China getting its energy supplies from a Venezuela, from an Iran, and possibly using that energy in a potential conflict with Taiwan. So while I'm aware that many people have wondered, why don't they just take military action against the Iranians, overthrow the Islamic Republic, blah, blah, blah. Netanyahu's perspective is his region, the Middle East. The president's perspective is the United States and the world, and the U.S. as a superpower and China as an emerging superpower. So please do keep that in mind when you wonder, why is this not on the timetable I want it to be? And there's actually been a clip that's been going around regarding social media influencers who are following different military maneuvers. There's Air Force major. I didn't post it. I didn't have it on my list of stories, but she said that, it's very difficult at times for the military to, keep certain things quiet, certain things under wraps. And, there are people, independent people all over the internet who are saying, I saw this happen, I saw that happen. We do need to be respectful of how, there are things we don't know about that the government, the military are doing. We have to be respectful that, in an open source model, a Newsmax, it's really easy to deduce that President Trump has bigger issues than just the Middle East on his plate when it comes to what is happening or what's not happening in Iran. And whatever Trump, Netanyahu, others possibly have planned, they're going to keep it as quiet as possible. And some of the things they're going to do, they're going to be diversionary on purpose, like with some of their public disagreements or different news reports. This is a multidimensional, multifaceted thing we're looking at, a theater we're looking at. And do try to keep that in mind. That's why, as believers, our ultimate responsibility is to pray and understand that the Lord has this all figured out. Pray for peace in the region, because there are millions of believers in Iran. Many of them are, underground Christians. There are, of course, the Messianic Jews in Israel, and all of them, including the Ayatollah himself, need to have a supernatural encounter with the risen Yeshua. Okay, our next story. This is something I saw forwarded on by Brian Samuel on his X feed. Thought it was very, very useful. When Charlie Kirk was murdered, the aftermath saw people seeking Jesus. Then Candace Owens entered the conversation, and suddenly it became less about Christ and all about conspiracy. The worship faded and the noise took over. It felt like the beginnings of revival with hearts turning and eternity in view. And of course, the serpent never wastes a moment. When God starts saving, Satan starts spinning. So, yeah, uh, many of you all can rewind to earlier in the fall 2025. You probably remember where you were when you heard that Charlie Kirk had been murdered. And you initially saw all of that outpouring of grief and people, going to church, reading their Bibles more, trying to get themselves right with God. And then you have this vacuum of, okay, who's going to fill what Charlie Kirk has left? And one of the main people who sadly has filled at least that attention span has been Candace Owens. And then others. I mean, you got Tucker Carlson to an extent, Nick Fuentes to an extent, and these are not people who should be filling the void left by Charlie Kirk. One of the big challenges when you have someone like Charlie Kirk who gets so big and now he's been removed from the scene, now you got people stepping in. And I remember that one of the first things I did after he died was I went and I pre-ordered his book, Stop in the Name of God, about the Sabbath. And I didn't get it until we returned from the IMCS Rabbis Conference. I got it like 3 months late. And within the scope of that 3 months, all kinds of, falsehoods, rumors, innuendos, really fake conspiracies, and then just some off the wall, crap about Charlie Kirk, have been put out by his wife. I'm sorry, his wife. Some of it was about his wife by people like Candace Owens and others. And yeah, that is the danger when you get so big and then a dramatic thing happens. So yeah, today when a lot of us think about Charlie Kirk, we're not thinking about his legacy, the questions he raised. We're not thinking about, praying for his widow, Erica, and his children. By the way, we do need to be thinking about praying for his those he left behind. Instead, it's, well, what are the latest things about what they're saying about him? And this is why we're seeing his legacy kind of rubbished, as they say. This is why I don't think the Messianic community is ever going to get massively large with, huge personalities, because when some of those huge personalities are removed from the scene, what's going to happen? Are we going to reflect back on, I met so and so at a particular time and that person said something very important to me? Or is instead going to be, well, I found out all this stuff after they died? Like what happened with for a figure like Ravi Zacharias. They had all these skeletons in their closet. And yeah, that's just really sad to see what the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's legacy might be. And I pray that there is some correction to this, but we'll see. All right, so here is a post by Protestia. This is it was posted on Valentine's Day, obviously 12:50 p.m. And here you see them say, we made a Valentine Day card for our continuationist brethren and sistren. And here it kind of makes fun of people speaking in quote unquote tongues. My issue with this is they mentioned our continuationist brethren and sistren rather than our charismatic brethren and sistren, because I identify as a continuationist. I believe in principle that the dramatic gifts of the Spirit are for today, but there is a difference between those who identify as charismatic versus those who identify as continuationist or continuous. Charismatics expect there to be dramatic gifts of the Spirit, i.e., quote unquote, speaking in tongues, which I do believe is being supernaturally empowered to speak a known language or dialect, not gibberish. They expect those dramatic events, dramatic gifts to appear at every worship service. Whereas a continuationist will agree in principle that yes, these things can manifest, but places a much higher priority on the gifts of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, things like this, and can feel the presence of the Holy Spirit by singing traditional hymns, for example, even with an organ, not the rock concert, smoke machine, jumping up and down, as is seen in a lot of charismatic venues. And we do have to be honest, some of that can affect some parts of our Messianic faith community. All right. Our next story, this is from Visegrad 24. This is where I got the number 500,000. This was posted on the 15th, posted yesterday. Hundreds of thousands of Iranians gathered across North America and Europe to support the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi and protest against the Islamic regime. So, yeah, we had about 500,000 over the weekend be involved in protests against the Islamic Republic, not just at the Munich gathering, but in many other places. And as I said, I saw that there was even one here in Dallas. Okay, from the New York Post yesterday. Bondi announces all Epstein files have been released with over 300 high-profile names unveiled. So, according to this at least, all of the Epstein files are out there. Of course, there are going to be a lot of people who start doing searches. They're going to start sifting through the Epstein files. They're going to come to this conclusion. They're going to come to that conclusion. That is why one of the major things we got to pray for right now is reason and sanity here on the American home front. Sorting through all of these documents is not going to be an instantaneous process. Some people are going to find this, they're going to find that, and they're going to jump to conclusions. It was just a little over a year ago that President Trump issued the executive order declassifying all of the JFK, RFK, and MLK files. And now we've got this, and who knows what's going to be next, right? So stay calm, but also brace yourself, because some of this material is going to be used against the Jewish community and against the state of Israel. All of us have already known that. On Friday, we mentioned the thing from Stand With Us, and we just have to stay up to date. There's not, I think, and this is my personal opinion, although I'm probably not alone, in our post October the 7th, 2023 world, there's not going to be a week that goes by when there's not some anti-Semitic incident, anti-Semitic piece of libel, anti-Zionist piece of libel that we're not going to have to take note of. And we just have to stay up to date and pray for discernment to know how we should respond. Because, yes, these are various road signs, and there's some people, they've made up their mind, they're turned over to it, so we can't do anything about it. Excuse me. There are going to be people in some of our Messianic congregations and assemblies who hear about this, and they're going to want somebody to speak out and not just push it off to the side, sweep it under the rug. And that is what we need to be concerned about. Okay, from Open Source Intel, the 15th of February, this was posted at 11:36 a.m. President Trump told Netanyahu in December he would support Israeli strikes on Iran's ballistic missile program if diplomacy fails. And here it talks about, different options that the U.S. could assist if Israel decides to, launch a strike on Iran, like offering them logistical support, refueling of their planes, that sort of thing. So, if there is a military conflict, I would expect, if past is prologue, by the way, I would expect if we see some of the events of last spring repeat themselves, you're going to see Israel go first. Now, that's just my speculation. It could be something different. But this is something which we do have to be paying attention to and praying about. And more than anything else, as we follow events and as we see this build up, We don't want to wait for there to be this dramatic point event and then be like, oh my God, what are we going to do about this? The world is falling apart. All hell is breaking loose. No, we need to be able to recognize, yeah, these things have been just steadily building for the past weeks, the past months, and now it's showtime, because there are going to be others who are in your sphere of influence, friends, family members, congregational members, etc., who you're going to have to help calm down and stabilize. Okay, another story from open source intel, and this comes with a 1 minute, 39-second clip. Prime Minister Netanyahu on Iran. If a deal is to be reached, it should have several components that we believe are important not only for the security of Israel, but the security of the world, the United States, the region, and the world. And this mainly has to be, we've mentioned this already today, it has to do with I'm sorry, Iran's nuclear aspirations, their ballistic missile program, and their terror proxy states. Okay, also open source intel. This was posted yesterday, 2/27, just ahead of the talks in Oman. Officials in the U.S. administration assess the chances that reaching an agreement with Iran are very slim, from I-24 News. Yeah, I mentioned this as we got started that, the president right now, President Trump, has a wide array of flexible options at his disposal. He is going through the diplomatic option. Yeah, we met in Oman. Now we're gonna meet in Geneva. We're gonna see if a deal can't be cut with the Iranians. Yet many are not optimistic about this, which means the military option is definitely out there as well. And who knows what other variations on that on that spectrum are also present. We don't know everything. Open source Intel Defender. Okay, let me move over to that. This was posted yesterday, 2/20. Internal discussions between senior figures in the U.S. military and intelligence community have started to contemplate the possibility of supporting a fresh round of Israeli strikes on Iran, with deliberations focusing less on whether Israel could act than on how the United States must assist. And here, it talks about things like aerial refueling, logistical support, flying over Arab countries, etc. So, yeah, as I said, I would expect Israel to move first and then just kind of be supported. We're going to refuel your planes. We're going to let you fly through our airspace. We're going to give you, tactical information. And that is what you saw when the 12-day war started in the last spring. Okay, another story from open source intel posted yesterday at 4:02. Iran has stated that an agreement which delivers economic benefits to both sides, including potential energy, mining, and aircraft deals, is on the table in ongoing talks that are expected to continue this week with the United States. You can read more about this in your time. So, Iran right now is going through the diplomatic motions. They're saying, well, we'll give you, various, energy concessions. Iran does have one of the world's largest oil and natural gas reserves. Likewise, we've got minerals in Iran, aircraft deals, all these kinds of economic concessions we're willing to make. And, how much of this is real versus how much of this is, the Iranians going through the motions because they know it might be over for the Islamic Republic. Because I can assure you of this: if you see regime change in Iran and the Islamic Republic, if you see it overthrown, you see the Shah return, some kind of a constitutional monarchy, or some kind of a democratic republic established, believe me, Iran's going to have energy deals, mineral deals, and other deals with the West too. This isn't just going to be about seeing the people of Iran see this theocratic terrorist state removed. It's going to also involve a new economic relationship between Iran and the West. It's not just going to involve security. Okay, we've got 5 more stories. Okay, our next story, this is from Joel Rosenberg, who is sending on a post from All Israel News. This involves the ongoing situation with Tucker Carlson. Is Christian community in Israel declining? Rosenberg denounces Tucker Carlson's claims as demonstrably provable lies. And Rosenberg talks about, as online rumors swirl that Tucker Carlson could be landing in Israel on his way back to the United States from Jordan, at least one evangelical leader is warning the popular podcaster that he's in real danger spiritually. We'll just have to wait and see what happens with Tucker Carlson and what he claims or does not claim about the Christian community in the Middle East, which he says is broadly on the decline, somewhat because of the state of Israel, the Zionists, whatever. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. All right, here is a post from the Department of State. Today, February the 16th, 7:02, and 36-second clip. Secretary Rubio on Iran. The president always prefers peaceful outcomes and is willing to talk with anyone, but it's going to be hard. We're dealing with radical Shia clerics who are making theological decisions, not geopolitical ones. Okay, so we take that for what it's worth. Yeah, the president wants, and we all should, our default should be, let's try to find a peaceful solution. Yet, we're not dealing with people in the Islamic Republic who are interested in geopolitical solutions. They base all their decisions based on their interpretation of Islam. So I interpret that as hey, we're going to try for diplomacy, but in the end, we know how difficult, if not impossible, it's going to be. All right, from my charisma. Some of you all have heard about this at Southeastern University. This was forwarded on from CBN News. Holy Spirit outpouring breaks out on Florida campus as students turn to non-stop worship. So an extraordinary move of the Holy Spirit that broke out at Florida's Southeastern University a week ago is continuing. Some people have been comparing to the Asbury Awakening from 2023. Now, we actually talked about the whole Asbury revival 3 years ago. We knew people who went to it, both Christian people as well as some Messianic Jewish leaders. I don't know anyone who has gone to the Southeastern activities revival. Ultimately, everyone is impacted who goes there, and they're going to come back with what presumably the Lord needs to do with them. And no, there is no one size fits all, quote unquote, revival. Many of you all know I have been negatively disposed to the concept that in the last days there's going to be a massive revival. I do believe there are going to be millions of believers who get themselves right with God. I do believe that. I'm more inclined to there being massive apostasy. We'll see what happens at Southeastern University. But for initially right now, I pray that many people are getting themselves right with God. I mean, we can definitely pray for that and hope for that. Okay, so there was a post circulating on social media over the past few days, an interview with former President Obama. Newsmax finally picked this up today. Obama, no evidence of alien contact. Obama on aliens. Former President Obama said he did not see evidence that aliens have made contact with us after sending social media abuzz by saying aliens were real on a podcast over the weekend. Yes, it appears that former President Obama's position on extraterrestrials is that, well, they presumably exist, but they're going to be on the other side of the universe, and it would take them centuries, millennia to make contact with us, and the impossibility of that is just, let's call it astronomical. I'm paraphrasing it's just they're probably aliens, but it's just so impossible. Not that I was the president and I know that we made contact with them. That is not what what President Obama said. Yet the fact that you have a figure like Obama who was in the White House a mere 12 years ago, right? Um, I'm sorry, 9 years ago. He left in 17. Yeah, I'm thinking about when his second term started, which was in 2013. Um, the fact that someone who was in the presidency, only a short 9 years ago, would talk about the extraterrestrial phenomenon, that will get people talking. It will get people speculating. And whether it's him or whether it's sources like My Charisma, we do want to stay on top of this. I do believe that there is an extraterrestrial component to the end time deception. And we want to be able to have an open and free discussion about it. That was an interesting story. And then finally, this was sad, but I'm not too surprised. Robert Duvall, star of The Godfather and The Great Santini, dies at 95. This is from Variety. Yeah, so many of you will probably have your favorite Robert Duvall film. The one I was initially reminded of when I saw that this had happened was, if you can believe it, because it came out 28 years ago, was Deep Impact. That was the one about the comet hitting the Earth. But there, of course, there are other films that many of us remember Robert Duvall for. He was a different kind of actor, represented a different period of entertainment, cinema. We're not going to see an actor like him again. And yeah, our thoughts and prayers go out to his family members, the survivors, but also we remember, a lot of the impact that somebody like him had, not only for specific films, specific movies, but also just for the time in which he performed. All right, so that concludes our news roundup. And once again, we are continuing in on theology, the series on one law or one Torah theology. Tomorrow, we'll be getting into Numbers 15, 15, and 16. So I remind you all, this study is cumulative. And when we get beyond some of these passages that use one law or one statute, then we're going to be getting into more the specific, how do we theologize this? How do we sort through it as philosophy? And what do we do about it as Messianic people today? Because, the Messianic community does have a very unique mission. Its main mission, Jewish outreach, Jewish evangelism, Israel solidarity, deeply tied into Romans 9, 10, and 11. But then you also see the Micah 4, 1 through 3, Isaiah 2, 2 through 4, the nation streaming to Zion in the end times. A greater appreciation of the new covenant promise of God writing his instruction on the heart and on the mind. And it's by the power of the Holy Spirit in supernaturally prompting people to consider these things and then writing them more consciously on the heart and mind, where you can avoid legalism and judgmentalism. How much of the one law, one Torah sub-movement guards against legalism and judgmentalism? So we're going to be getting into that later on in our multi-part study. As always, on behalf of Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. Please do consider signing up for a monthly $25 or $50 donation. That, more than anything else, really encourages us that you partner with us, you want to stand with us, and you want to help us. If you have not already, please do visit my website, messianicapologetics.net, where you can access a wide array of articles, frequently asked questions entries. You can check out some back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee moment shorts, back issues of Outreach Israel News, and generally speaking, you can take a look at our different ministry adventures over the years. Be sure to give this episode a thumbs up or a heart. It'll definitely help our exposure on social media. We will see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.